Good afternoon and welcome to our 4 p.m. edition of Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and it's good to have you with us. South Korea and the U.S. held their inaugural working group meeting on North Korea in Washington, and it looks like one of the first outcomes has been reached. Washington has given the green light to the Inter-Korean Railway project, which it previously expressed reservations about. We'll be looking at this development further later in the show, but first we catch up with the latest headlines by turning to Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. The South Korean government has formally announced that it will shut down a controversial foundation funded by Japan to support the women Japan sexually enslaved during the Second World War, the so-called comfort women. The foundation was set up in 2015 as part of an agreement with Japan, but it's been unpopular with the Korean people and the victims it was meant to help. The Moon administration has been trying to scrap the agreement, saying that it's not a true solution to the comfort women issue. Our Park Hee-jun reports.
The Ministry of Gender Equality and Family announced on Wednesday that the government will dissolve the Reconciliation and Healing Foundation, also known as the Comfort Women Foundation. The foundation was first established in a bilateral agreement with Japan in 2015 under the former Park Geun-hye administration to financially support the victims and their families. Japan provided funding of 1 billion yen or $8.8 million. However, the foundation was controversial from the very start. While Tokyo has claimed that the agreement is enough to completely settle the issue of comfort women, critics of the deal have called it unilateral and say it doesn't reflect the wishes of the victims nor come with Japan's apologies. Gender Equality and Family Minister Jin Seon-mi says the decision to disband it was made to prioritize the victims' interest and that the ministry will continue its efforts to recover their honor and dignity. Following the announcement, the ministry will push forward with the legal procedures required for the shutdown. It will also work with Seoul's foreign ministry to return the fund provided by the Japanese government. The House of Sharing, a nursing home for the surviving comfort women, has expressed relief and gratitude at the announcement, saying that the decision to close down the foundation is better late than never. While the decision is being welcomed across Korea, it has prompted immediate criticism from the Japanese Foreign Ministry. It's expected to further strain Seoul-Tokyo relations, especially following the South Korean Supreme Court's recent decision on compensation for wartime forced labor. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Starting tomorrow, the two Koreas will be connected by a military road in the demilitarized zone. According to military sources, the 12-meter-wide road connecting the South and North Korean sides of the DMZ will be completed Thursday morning. The road is located on Arrowhead Hill, or Hwasalmori Goji in Korean, the site of one of the fiercest battles of the Korean War, and it'll be used for the Inter-Korean project to recover war remains in the area next year. The area is currently being cleared of landmines. The recovery of those remains and the building of the road were part of the military agreement signed by the two Koreas in September at the summit in Pyongyang. President Moon Jae-in is calling for his officials to do more to create an economy that includes everyone, his so-called inclusive growth policy. He says that it's not something only Korea needs to do, but that the rest of the world is on board too. Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jae-in says the administration's push to establish inclusive growth requires more effort, and he says it's a challenge for other nations as well. In a meeting with the heads of presidential commissions and advisory groups, including the Commission on Policy Planning, the president said the government needs to build an inclusive nation as part of a big national policy plan, which each commission has helped lay the groundwork for. And the president highlighted that the push for inclusivity isn't limited to Korea.
특별히 하나 더 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 지금 우리가 이 포용적 성장, 또 지속 가능 발전, 사람 중심 뭐 이렇게 고민하고 있는데 이것이 대한민국에서만 또는 문재인 정부만 무슨 특별한 가치로 우리 고민하고 논의하고 있는 것이 아니라는 사실입니다. 동시대적 고민이라고 할까? 국제사회 세계 모든 나라의 공통된 고민이고 공통된 관심입니다.
Moon added that Korea's success in achieving inclusive growth could set an example for the world and urged each committee to keep in mind that the goals they're working to actually carry out are precisely what other countries are talking about doing. As part of the goal of building an inclusive nation, the Moon administration has been working to tackle economic disparity by boosting the minimum wage, pursuing fairness in the economy, and helping small and mid-sized enterprises prosper together with the big conglomerates. The president referred to the multilateral meetings he's attended in Europe and elsewhere in the Asia-Pacific region, also the upcoming G20 summit and next year's APEC summit. An overlapping area of interest among countries around the world, he said, is building a foundation of fair and lasting progress with the people at the center of it. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Breaking nearly a week-long deadlock, the parliament is finally working again. After 2 attempts Wednesday at making a deal, National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang and rival party floor leaders finally shook hands. The rival parties said that both their demands have been met and that the National Assembly will begin its review of the government's budget proposal for next year as soon as today. The ruling Democratic Party accepted the demand of the main opposition Liberty Korea Party and the centrist Bareunmirae Party that Parliament launch a probe into a hiring scandal at a subway operator. South Korean stocks opened sharply lower today after Tuesday's turmoil on Wall Street, but they recovered in the afternoon. The benchmark Kospi closed at 2076, down about 0.3%. The secondary index, the Kosdaq, actually gained for the day, up 0.7% to almost 696. In the morning, though, the Kospi was down by as much as 1.3%. The Korean won, meanwhile, weakened slightly against the U.S. dollar, closing at 1,131 won, up 2.5 won from yesterday. As of last month, South Korea had a single export good worth more than 100 billion U.S. dollars, semiconductors. But the price of memory chips dropped in October, fueling a debate about whether semiconductors have indeed reached the peak of their supercycle. Our Kim Hae-sung explains.
Semiconductors account for a fifth of South Korea's total exports, a quarter of all South Korean companies' earnings, and have driven the country's economy in recent years. But prices of DRAM chips used to store data and programs fell over 10% on month to $7.30 in October. NAND flash prices also fell, raising concerns prices have reached their peak and are set to fall further.
The semiconductor industry has a super cycle where prices go up and down based on demand and supply. Prices have doubled over the last 2 years on soaring demand, but now with the global economy slowing down and IT companies including Amazon and Facebook cutting data center investment, demand for chips and therefore prices is going to go down.
On top of that, China, which purchases more than 60% of global semiconductors, announced last week that there's been progress in its anti-monopoly investigation into 3 key chip makers, Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, Micron Technology, which could end up pressuring prices. On the supply front, China is also expected to mass produce its own chips next year under its Made in China 2025 plan. But regardless, other experts argue the semiconductor boom is here to stay.
Unlike the previous supercycle of boom and bust, global chip makers now have huge production capacities and can cut manufacturing volume in order to counter plunging prices. Demand for chips will actually go up, not from PCs or data servers, but from IoT consumer good products, AI, and 5G networks, so the demand and supply balance will correct itself.
In addition, the ongoing U.S.-China trade spat could give South Korean chip makers time to invest and innovate so they can stay ahead of Chinese companies, with Washington banning semiconductor components from being exported to Chinese state-owned company Fujian Jinhua, citing security concerns. In the end, what matters now for South Korean companies, experts say, is to keep innovating and nurturing talent to develop high-end memory chips that will be in high demand in the near future. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Seoul and Washington's new working group on North Korea officially launched on Tuesday. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the working group has been set up to make sure that the two allies share everything necessary for denuclearizing North Korea and ensuring peace on the Korean Peninsula. In this part of the show, we'll be discussing further the outcomes and the future of this working group after this report from our Foreign Ministry correspondent, Lee Ji-won.
The newly established South Korea-U.S. Working Group on North Korean Affairs held its first meeting in Washington on Tuesday. Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry and the U.S. State Department both released a statement saying that the working group reaffirmed the importance of their alliance in achieving regional peace and security and further strengthened their coordination on efforts to fully denuclearize North Korea. The statement said a group led by South Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Lee Do-hun and Washington's Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun also discussed achieving lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, as well as the implementation of UN Security Council resolutions and inter-Korean cooperation. In a press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the working group will formalize the processes of denuclearization and inter-Korean efforts. Though Pompeo said that there is complete agreement between Seoul and Washington on how such efforts will proceed, he mentioned that the group will make sure neither side takes actions that the other is unaware of or hasn't had a chance to comment on. In fact, he specifically mentioned South Korea, saying that the group is to ensure, quote, the South Koreans don't take an action that the other is unaware of. There is a view that the inter-Korean projects, including the rail and road links, are much more developed than the denuclearization talks, leading to concerns by Washington over the joint efforts to continue sanctions on the regime. Pompeo reiterated that the U.S. wants to ensure denuclearization and the peace process don't lag behind the increased inter-Korean exchanges. The secretary said the two should progress in tandem and that the working group is designed to keep it that way. 이지원, Arirang News.
Now, for more on that working group and the latest on North Korea, we have with us Dr. Go Myung-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the inaugural meeting of this working group on North Korea took place on Tuesday. It seems to have gone quite well without too much of a hitch. What do you make of this first meeting so far?
Definitely it's a positive development. I mean, we have to remember that the origin of this working group was what happened back in October, probably the worst moment in the recent history between the two allies, when President Trump made this remark back in October when it was asked about potential relaxation of sanctions by South Korea. President Trump mentioned that South Korea wouldn't do anything without the U.S. approval. That was a minor scandal in Korea and Washington, that how a U.S. president could talk like that to an ally like South Korea. So clearly having a working group is going to avoid a repeat of a situation like that, and it's going to smooth out the perception of the development of the relations between South Korea and the United States.
So it was not mentioned in that previous report. After the meeting finished, in a press briefing, the South Korean nuclear envoy Lee Do-hun revealed that the U.S. has given its strong support to the inter-Korean railway project. Now, of course, that project is the one reached in previous inter-Korean summits designed to eventually connect the roads and railways of the two Koreas. Now, this is a surprise considering Washington has quite openly expressed its reservations over it in recent weeks. And as you said, Trump had mentioned, about giving permission to South Korea for whatever its actions are. So it seems like Washington has given its permission, could we say? Does this surprise you at all? And what has changed? Why now?
Well, clearly, the purpose of the working group is to have a well-coordinated response to a challenges like this of how to approach North Korea, engage North Korea economically and politically. And it's like for South Korea's part, essentially resolve some of the misperception the U.S. might have had about what South Korea intended to do by reconnecting the railroad and the road with North Korea. I think South Korea used this opportunity to dispel the misperception and clarify the fact that South Korea didn't intend to, for example, supply North Korea with materials beyond what's strictly necessary to establish some sort of ceremonial, symbolic event of reconnecting the transportation link between the two Koreas. So essentially, South Korea probably clarified to the United States that we won't be violating any UN or US sanctions.
However, this doesn't dispel this concerns that you mentioned, we talked about earlier, where Trump gives the US gives their permission for Korea to do what they want with North Korea. I mean, so does this perhaps continue these kind of criticisms going?
Well, I think it's a little bit different from like giving permission over and the policy coordination between the two allies. I think both South Korea and the United States have agreed from the get-go that when it comes to North Korea, the coordination is of utmost importance. So when I think President Trump misused the term permission in this case, I think he should have used the policy coordination. So I think, being President Trump being who he is, I think people really didn't take that too seriously. But I think, there's nothing less important than like emphasizing the role of close coordination between the United States and South Korea. And working group is clearly is here to serve that purpose.
Korean officials also said that they hope the groundbreaking ceremony for the railway project will take place before the end of the year. That's obviously later than originally scheduled, which was for late this month and early December. Do you think it will happen now?
I think so. I think definitely the announcement yesterday in Washington about the results of the working group has been a very positive development in that regard, and essentially removed a major obstacle towards carrying out this reconnection ceremony between the two Koreas.
So let's look ahead now for this kind of working group. So this meeting went very smoothly, but it might not always go this smoothly. So, I mean, what will happen with this working group if there are more difficult matters that they need to handle? And how often and how easily can they convene this kind of group?
Well, I think the working group is actually flexible enough to manage this kind of difference in opinions between the two sides. And that's the exact purpose of the working group. And I think if there's any discrepancy or like a difference in opinion between the two allies, that conflict is going to be contained within the working group and be resolved here. And the composition and the frequency of the meetings within our working group indicates that I think they will minimize this kind of differences of opinions. We know, for instance, that the working group is going to encompass not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the part of South Korea and State Department, the part of the United States, but also it's going to have the Ministry of Unification, as well as members of the National Security Council of the Blue House, and likewise on the American side. So essentially, the working group is going to incorporate many different actors who are relevant when it comes to determining policy matters when it comes to North Korea. So it actually minimizes the conflict or differences of opinion, and also the frequency of the meetings. Apparently, a working group is going to regularize the meetings, and then they try to have at least 2 meetings per month. I think the frequent meetings is going to allow frequent communication between the two sides. So it will even if there's a difference in opinion, probably the working group will be able to contain it and then minimize it.
So despite this meeting going quite well, Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, in a separate policy briefing with the press, he seemed to warn Seoul that, Seoul, they need to make sure peace and the denuclearization of North Korea, he says, do not lag behind improvements in the relationship between the two Koreas. So that sounds like a warning to Seoul not to get too far ahead, though.
Well, clearly, there's been some recent statements from South Korea and the South Korean government that sounded like I was asking the international community for supporting the South Korean idea of relaxing sanctions on North Korea as an incentive for North Korea to take tentative steps towards denuclearization. So I think Secretary Pompeo's message is essentially a response to that sanctions regime as well as the denuclearization, essentially these are the conjoined twins. They have to take place at the same speed and same way and same scale. So I think the reiteration is clearly also a way to influence the South Korean policymaking process that we should match our speed of inter-Korean engagement with the denuclearization process.
Okay, so the South Korea-U.S. relationship seems to be good after this meeting. But actually, the bigger fish that they need to sort out is the North Korea-U.S. talks, which have been stalled for some time now. But there are now reports saying that there will be finally high-level talks between Pompeo and Kim Young-chol from North Korea next week, possibly. Now, we've been down this road before, so maybe we shouldn't get our hopes too high right now because it can be delayed or postponed again at some point. But they do need to have this meeting at some point, right? Otherwise, they've planned this summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un next year. So they need to meet now before it goes on to next year.
Clearly, that's absolutely right. I think President Trump has signaled the willingness to meet with Kim Jong-un as soon as possible, possibly earlier next year. But then we have to remember that the realization of the second U.S. DPRK summit is contingent upon the progress being made on the denuclearization front, and in this particular case, it will be North Korea to essentially take genuine steps towards denuclearization, such as shutting down the nuclear infrastructure such as Dongchangri and Punggye-ri test sites completely, as well as providing an inventory of North Korea's nuclear assets to the United States. Reading the North Korean media in the recent days, there's no clear signal that the North Korea is taking that kind of approach right now. So I think there could be tentative meetings on both sides regarding finding out the possible date for the second summit, but then without a big explicit change in the North Korea's public position regarding denuclearization, I would be still skeptical about a high-level meeting taking place soon.
Let's move on to some other developments on North Korea before we go. So on Tuesday, North Korea destroyed 10 guard posts along the demilitarized zone on the border between the two Koreas. And that was, of course, agreed upon in the military agreement that the two Koreas signed back in September. How much does this show that the North Koreans are sincere in trying to show that they want this path towards improving relations with the two Koreas?
I think it clearly shows their sincerity towards implementing the agreements they have reached with South Korea, but at the same time, it betrays North Korea's confidence about their willingness to go along with the confidence-building measures and the dismantlement of the conventional military infrastructure along the DMZ. I think North Koreans are thinking that because they have acquired nuclear deterrence, they can now engage in reducing their conventional weapons. So I think it's actually a sign of confidence as well.
So these guard posts, I mean, the pictures we're seeing, they're quite dramatic with explosions, but at the end of the day, they're not that huge a deal for the North Korean military, is that right?
Or for the South Korean military either. I mean, in many ways, the guard posts were there in violation of in spirit, a violation of the armistice agreement. And then there are actually hundreds of them. So just getting rid of like 10% of the overall total, I think it doesn't really have a material impact on the defense posture, offensive posture on both sides.
Tomorrow as well, on Thursday, there's further developments on the border as well. The two Koreas are set to connect a military road across the DMZ as well. Now, this road is set to be used in order to help efforts to recover war remains. But the symbolism of connecting these kind of roads is quite striking. What should we make of this?
Well, we have gone down this road before. I mean, one of the most shocking inter-Korean development in the recent years happened to be the establishment of not recent, but happened to be the establishment of the Kaesong Industrial Complex on the North Korean side. So, I mean, compared to that kind of event, reconnecting a minor transportation link with North Korea for a very specific, narrow purpose of finding remains of the war dead, I think it's actually it's significant, but it's not really materially important in the ongoing discussions, I would say.
And you don't think there are any concerns about violating international sanctions? Because when you talk about reconnecting roads, that's the first concern, I think, that can be raised.
If the road is reconnected and the road is used to transfer or import or export goods and materials that are explicitly listed in the UN sanctions as forbidden, then that will be actually problematic. But I think both Koreas have clarified that the purpose of a road connection is going to serve a humanitarian purpose.
Well, we'll have to see how these developments continue as well to grow, and hopefully we'll get your opinions on them later in the future as well. Thank you for coming on the show today.
My
and
pleasure.
We look forward to having you back next time.
Great.
And that's all from me for this show, but stay tuned to our later newscasts for all the latest updates. Thank you for watching and hope you can join us again next time. Goodbye.